We're gonna take our time, slow down and design. Yeah.
Ta-da! Okay, so now we're kicking. I've created the new school Permaculture that has been traveling around the world. It's a nomadic school. I go everywhere where people call me, and I was looking also for a place to settle down. And one of my conclusions was that I wanted to live in a subtropical climate because I don't deal very well with cold. So that's why I end up in the Macaronesian Islands. So this is a sentence that it's very special to me. It means, in your hands, it's the power of the empire. So what I do, and permaculture, in my opinion, it's a lot about empowerment. How can we empower ourselves, and how can we empower other people? And through that empowerment, we create the paradise that we all dream about. Because permaculture is about implementing and creating our dreams. And again, all goes back to the root, to the ethical root of permaculture. Taking care of the earth, taking care of the people, and then fair share. So the Macaronesian Islands, they are composed of four archipelagos. The Azores in the north, that it's part of Portugal. The Madeira Islands, also part of Portugal. And then we have the Canaries more in the south, more subtropical climate. They are part of Spain. And then we have Cape Verde, that it's more in the south. It's a lot more of arid landscape. So here's a map. Cross your fingers. Ta-da. So as you can see, Africa and Europe, and then the Macaronesian Islands. There are more than 20 islands. This is the Azores. And they have a lot of diversity. Some are really green and lush. Some others are very stony. This is going too fast. So this island started by having no inhabitants. They were desert islands. But as the first ships start circulating around the Mediterranean, they started to be occupied. Some of the first boats that arrived were Phoenician and Greek, and they go back to more than 3,000 years ago, the occupation. So the islands in the beginning were all covered in a very lush forest, some of the oldest forests in the world, called the Laurisilva forest. And this forest has reduced to just 20% of its initial percentage. All the Mediterranean was covered with this type of forest, and now it became a semi-arid landscape. And as you know, semi-arid means on the process of becoming a desert. The Madeira Islands, for example, Madeira means wood. So they were known for all the forests that they had there. But as the discoveries and the building of big ships by the Spanish and Portuguese conquistadors, a lot of the forest was cut down, and the depletion of resources in this island started. And that have been happening for many, many years. And it's interesting because it's been passing by very rich families. And it still happens nowadays, that the control over the resources, it's based on these rich families. So a lot of immigration have been happening there. A quarter of the population has left because they didn't have the quality of life that they wanted in the islands, so they just decided to leave. And it's still happening nowadays. still have the same pattern. I can tell you that in Spain, nowadays, the percentage of unemployment among young people, it's of 60%. And I can also tell you that 60% of the young people of the world, the teenagers, are Africans. So we are here to talk about climate change and the impact of climate change on these islands. And we know that the climate has been changing since ever. For more than 4 billion years it has been changing. It's just that we are now living in a process where the impact is really big. So a lot of this information comes from scientists that they have different opinions among themselves. One film that was produced, The Inconvenient Truth, brought a lot of attention to the climate change and gave some Nobel Prizes to some people. But still the scientific community do not all agree with each other's research. So we have the inconvenient truth in one side and the great global warming swindle on the other side. A very interesting scientist is Noam Chomsky, and he's got a very special opinion about this type of research. He believes that many of these studies are made only to support the will and the interest of big corporations. And we also know that 90% of the impact on climate change is created by only 10 big corporations. So it's another level than the individual level. So that takes us into, sometimes it's hard to believe on which scientists shall we give attention to. And it also, for me, sometimes it gives me a little bit of chicken skin when I have to say that permaculture, it's a design science. Well, we know that humans are having a big impact also in these processes. The other day, I had this insight that this climate change, it's just like a sauna. Okay, sometimes it gets hotter, sometimes it gets colder. That's how it works. The big difference, it's that men have put in a pipe to the exhaust pipe of the car, putting the monoxide going inside of the sauna. And then it takes a nap inside. So a lot of the deforestation that it's going on, it's having a... Okay, okay, perfect. Thank you. Technology. So I'm not very used to this type of presentations. Usually I do a lot of play therapy and teach people through games. I find this boring. So sometimes I think that what would be the opinion of someone that would be out of this planet looking at us? What would he think about what we are doing? And the first thing that comes to my mind is they probably think we are stupid. When we look to the past of this planet and to the other islands, there's a very interesting island, the Easter Island. Who here have heard about the Easter Island? Do you know why it has the civilization there have collapsed? Yeah, depletion of their resources. So Easter Island is a very good example of, they built these beautiful statues, but they don't have any people to see them from their natives. So not very efficient. So in the Canary Islands, in the Macaronesian Islands, and especially on the Canaries, the first people that lived there, they were just shepherds and fishermen. They lived in total harmony with nature. They were raising goats The goats were free range. They weren't so many, so they hadn't problems with deforestation at the level that we face nowadays. As many of you know probably, one of the factors that create so much deforestation in the Mediterranean was overgrazing, many times through the impact of goats. So these people were living in total harmony till about 500 years ago, when the first Spanish colonizers got there and killed all of them. So the Guanches civilization also got almost extinct due to this superiority complex. This is about random pictures, was not part of the plan. But we'll move on. So one of the big problems that we face in the Canary Islands, it's related to the frequency of fires. So due to these climate changes, we have a lot of more fires more frequently. And just 2 years ago, 11% of the forest of one of the islands got burned, the island of La Gomera. And combined with this, we have problems also related to erosion, because the rain events are becoming more and more frequent and more intense. And all the soil is getting washed down to the sea. And we know that when we lose 1 millimeter of soil in 1 hectare, that represents 10 tons of topsoil. And that's really hard to give back to the earth again. And there are other layers related to this, because when this erosion goes down to the shores, it has a huge impact on the wildlife. So in the past, people were finding a lot of fish in the shores of the islands, but not anymore. It's even hard to dive with all the pollution, let's say. When we look about the impact of climate change in ecosystems, permaculture is very much centered on land development. But really the most critical environments in the world are our oceans. The temperature of the ocean is changing dramatically. The sea currents are changing. The migrations of dolphins, sharks, whales, it's changing. Birds, they don't have the same patterns as in the past. One interesting event that is happening in the island of Tenerife, it's the incidence of sharks, for example. People have never seen as many sharks as today in these places. Another part of the big problems and that we all face is that farmers are having big problems on figuring out when to plant, when to harvest, how to preserve, when to preserve. And this is having a huge impact on the local economy, because the food production is being affected, and the fishermen are having a huge difficulty on finding fish. It's not like before. I've talked to some fishermen in the Madeira Islands, and they told me that in the past they used to go with their boats and fill their boats with fish. And if they would get the boat full, and they would still have fishes on the mesh, on the net, they would call another boat. Hey, come here, we have fish for you. Nowadays, when they find fish, they are starting to put the net, and another boat comes fast and tries to get the fish faster. And we are talking about 30 years, the impact that we have created in 30 years. Well, something interesting that it's happening also, and that you probably have always also heard about, it's the plastic islands. It's a brand new phenomenon in humanity. I hope we don't measure our development based on these new achievements. And a lot of the wildlife is dying because of this. Whales are dying because of eating plastic. Turtles are dying because of eating plastic. It's a huge impact. Okay. So these people, because no, it's not working. It's okay, I'll figure it out. So these people, they used to live sustainable. Used to live sustainable. If you look at this house, it's 100% compostable. Well, the stones, you can recycle them to build other structure. The roof is made of straw. So the big question is, what do we have to learn from these people? And what do we as permaculturists have to share with these people? I've been working with indigenous communities, and something that is very common in aid work, and sometimes I see it also in permaculturists, it's that we think we have the solutions. We have studied so much, and we go there and we want to take our solutions and we want to help these people. So, in my opinion, the best way to help these people is by listening what they have to say. So I have a strategy that it's based in 3 different moments when you work with a community. In the first moment, you look for what are the people's needs. In the second moment, you try to go deeper into what are the people's needs. In the third moment, you go back to moment number 1. So it's all about understanding the environment that we have around us. We say that permaculture is 80% observation and 20% work. That's how we do a good design, efficient design. So for me, it's a lot about active observation and active listening. So here you can see a good example of the erosion patterns that we are finding in many of these islands. The level of cover of organic material is decreasing dramatically. But there are also some nice stories. I was one day in La Gomera asking my questions to the locals about if they knew about other permaculturists that had been around or good examples, and they told me to go and visit the farm. So I went to this farm, and they had a food forest there. And it was a 25 years old food forest, something I'd never seen before. One interesting point about this food forest, it's that it had its support species, they were all up there. They never cut them. First thing, they asked me, well, what do you think we should do here? And I told them, well, you should cut the biggest trees you have here. And they looked, wow, you're crazy. You want us to cut the trees down? Well, if you cut the big ones, they are just for fertility. Then you get the productive trees after them. But they said, well, now we created this connection with these trees, we cannot cut them. So there are many layers in the social landscape. And that's what I'm trying to go deeper and understand. This connection between people and nature, and how to make it more productive. So here you have a picture of La Gomera Island. This valley, they had a huge fire. It came from the top and burned down all the valley. More than 50 houses got burned. It was really, really sad. People are still very traumatized with the experience. And they are still very emotional about talking about it. So this is the bottom impact of climate change. Some erosion patterns. So one thing that I've been discovering, I'm very passionate about learning with tribal communities and indigenous communities. And one thing that I've discovered is that the indigenous people, they also had their climate scientists. They had this man, they used to go to the top of a mountain and make a special fire. Many times he would use plants like cypress or other types of special plants that when they burn, they release special particles in the air that makes the water condense. And they create rain more down the valley. So there's a lot to learn with these natural scientists. This has been my oldest student ever. He's part of the Quechua people in the Andes. His name is Martin, and he's 74 years old. And I asked him, hey Martin, why do you come to this course? And he said, well, so that I have something interesting and new to talk to my nephews. Well, in this part of the Andes, we were having the course in one side of the mountain, and in the other side of the mountain there was a big uranium mine. And one of the person attending the course was the local mayor, also a Quechua. And he had a lot of problems with his joints. And he was telling me that they can't grow their quinoa anymore. And they believe it's because of contamination of this mine. So that means that this contamination doesn't go down, but it can also come up the mountain. And we also know that problems with joints, many times it's related to this type of contamination. Well, when I teach, there is a method that I use a lot that is questioning. So I'm going to ask you some questions now. How much water do you think an average European consumes every day? 150, 200, something between that. How much an average American consumes of water per day? 500? Something between 500 and 600. What's the average consumption of water in Israel, for example? Any idea? Something in between 500, 550. And what's the average consumption of water in Palestine? 20 liters. How much is the average water consumption in Afghanistan? 20 liters. How much is the average water consumption in Haiti? 10 liters. Haiti is a country that have cut down almost all the forest. So it's very special for me to be here with some Haitian people and after this event to go and work with them there. And we have a lot to learn with these people. It's like with the Cubans. They are a great example. Thumbs up for Cubans. %80 organic local food. That's very special. We don't find that in many countries, you know. These last days I've been here, I was looking a lot to the cars. I was impressed by the cars. How many years are you running these cars here? 50 years? 60 years? 59. Yeah. I think a lot of the car industry scientists should come to Cuba to do some research, because in Europe the cars usually don't last more than 10 years and it's not so easy to get parts for them also. So a lot to learn about that also. Conservation of good examples. So I'm going to show you now some pictures. Some pictures of things that I have done. I like to work a lot with tropical climates because the impact and the development can be seen really fast. This is an example of a mandala that we made in the Amazon jungle, in the Peruvian Amazon. This is how we started the design, with all the access and everything. We added a lot of charcoal, because in the tropical climate it's really hard to keep the fertility in the soil. So better than making compost, it's really to keeping the fertility in the soil with strategies like biochar, for example. And the result after 3 months was something like this. It was amazing. I was working with, for me, one of the best permaculturists I've ever met, Doug Bullock. Probably some of you have heard about him. He has a very interesting farm. And he's a person that makes us really relaxed in the social landscape. So it's a lot about activating our creativity, being as much creative as you can. And for me, this is really critical in education. It's to support people's creativity. We have been educated in a system that stimulates a lot the use of our left side of the brain. It's the analytical brain, you know, calculations, comparisons, competition, and in my opinion, a lot of the change of paradigm is related to starting to use more the right side of the brain, the creative side, extending our edges, extending our possibilities, you know? It's like in permaculture, the productivity of a system is only limited by the intellect and the creativity. So we should design more for that. One of the problems with this place now is that it's producing too much food than people eat. And again, a social layer. The cooks, they are not used to these vegetables. So they are a little bit uncomfortable about cooking these vegetables. So it's interesting how the design changes. And there are also variants that we can't predict. Are you feeling good? Are you tired? Usually when students get tired on my course, I ask them to change seats. That's a good strategy. So something that was interesting also in the Andes, for example, was the participation of the local ladies. And something that inspired me really a lot was that they have their own club. They call it the Mothers Club. Only the mothers can be part of it. And that's, I believe that's where they make their management of the community, you know? Because men are more into business, buying and selling. But really the managers are the women. And many times when we want to have impact on a community, it's through the woman. They are the connection many times. This is very interesting, something they show me, how the shepherds, they cook in the mountain, they make a fire, and cover it with these stones, and the stones get really hot, and then they cook on top of the hot stones. Really interesting way, very sustainable. And here we have them presenting their design. Really proud. As proud as any Western student. They are really they feel really special when they get their certificate in their hands. Actually, the main challenge was to stop them to present. They were always wanting to add more and having more ideas. And something that was also very interesting was their ability to create three-dimensional models with stones and sticks and leaves. That's where they felt the most comfortable. I'm also teaching the different types of courses, not only the PDC. I'm teaching also food forests courses. I just saw the presentation of the Hawaiian people. I'm also very passionate about taro. I think taro could save the world. Very resilient plant. In the Canaries, for example, they just cook it on Christmas. But it's so much easy compared with potatoes, for example. The input for growing potatoes compared to taro, it's ridiculous. In the Andes, they were using a fertilizer that it's the 20-20-20, NPK 20-20-20. It's the most intensive I've ever seen. And this, you just get a piece of root, throw it somewhere, and it will grow. So a lot of what I do is teaching through dynamics, because it has been proven that lecture, people sometimes they have the tendency more to get tired and exhausted, and their attention level goes a lot down through lecture. But when they learn with each other in groups and they share the knowledge and the information, that's where you get the most knowledge out of them. So a lot of group dynamics. Minutes, okay. So we have 5 minutes. Maybe we can move into questions if someone have questions about what I've talked about. Yeah, I prefer to teach through questions. I think it's more efficient and more useful and more dynamic with the people also. So if someone has some questions to ask.
Okay, first let's...
Okay.
One more time, taking the privilege of the host. I think that now we have like a perspective, a little bit of like the different archipelagos and aggregation of islands of the Atlantic Ocean. So I would like to start, if you can tell us about, maybe a couple of lessons learned or how the archipelagos like could continue these traditional historical links that we have and things that we can do together. Because I know that there are people from Fernando de Noronha, the oceanic islands of Brazil here. There's also some islands in the south that, our heart is with Argentina, but one day. And all of that, like lessons learned from the Atlantic.
Well, lessons to learn. Well, I think the main lessons to learn is really related into listen to what the people have to say, because they are on the business of sustainability for many years. They are just using chemical fertilizers for the last 30 years, maybe. Most of the Canary Islands, for example, and other islands were cereals. They used to grow a lot of cereals, were the base of their diet. and they would just plant them on the rainy season and leave it, just leave it, and then go back and harvest. So very low input. And some other lessons are, you can also see it here in Cuba, the openness, how much these people are opened, how much they are curious, how much they want to connect, you know. They have a totally different attitude than us, the Westerns, you know. They are more into connection, connecting, reaching out, you know. They are not so much in this competition framework, I believe. They are more friendly, more open most of the time. Things are changing, tourism is coming, but still, that genetic is still there, I believe. So these have been some of the main lessons. Islands, something that is really special about islands, in my opinion, is that you can walk, but there will be a point when you get to the sea. And when you get to the sea, you will have to turn back. And that's what's really different about an island, is that you always have to face inside. And the answers most of the time are inside. Nowadays things are changing, people are leaving. They can't live there anymore. There are no jobs, you know. Something interesting that is happening is that many women leave. The men stay to take care of the farms of their family. So now they don't have women, for example. So it's really interesting, this social landscape. Now how things are changing. Many things.
Thank you. You mentioned about the soil erosion and in the Canaries. I think it may have been Gomera or all of the islands. I'm wondering if the effect on the sea is because it's over-fertilized soil, or is it just that any soil is going to have that effect on the fisheries? Can you say a bit more about that?
So I told you that in the Andes they were using the NPK 20-20-20. In the Canaries or in the Macaronesia they used the 20-20-15 for their banana monocultures. So of course this is being washed. They don't have much wells for the water, so there isn't that much contamination in their water. But still there's a lot of these fertilizers that get washed and go to the sea and have a huge impact. Yeah.
Over here. All right. I missed the first part, but I don't know if you already said it. I am also a teacher in Costa Rica. I work mostly with kids, but a lot of different ages. And I'm really interested in knowing if you have like a site or somewhere where you would share your dynamics or all those games. And I also have mine, so we could maybe exchange, because I really like to teach through games.
Mm-hmm. So when you teach through games, it becomes a lot more challenging, because you want to keep the standards and you want to keep the content of the information. So you have to choose a really good game, and you have to create a really good dynamic. I'm developing a farm in the Canary Islands. Something that is special there is that you can find coconuts on the beach, and you can find cherry trees on the top of the island. So in between I found a place where I can grow chestnuts next to papayas. So this is the next step, but I've been invited to teach in Japan and India and Australia, so we'll see. But I'm always open into having apprentices teaching with me and experiment and learning together, because that's what it's all about. A website. Yes, I have a website. If people are interested, in the end they can come to me and I will give you my card. Thank you.
Thanks for the interactive nature of your presentation. It was great. In terms of this conversation and the fact that we're talking about island agriculture, for me, my question is there anyone that you've met that's focusing on like oceanic agriculture, ocean farming? I work with someone in Connecticut who does vertical farming with like kelp, oysters, mussels, like farming the whole oceanic column, and kelp is amazing for bioremediation and for biofuel and for great nutrients. So is there anyone focusing on remediating the wonderfully rich seas around the islands that you've come in contact with? Thanks.
Well, talking about farming the sea. So a lot of people is focusing on getting algae, for example, and using the algae to eat or as fertilizer. It's a very interesting resource that I believe we can use. About having a positive impact on the changes that are happening on the shores, I believe it's a lot about holding the soil, keeping the soil in its place, and creating as much organic material as possible. You know? Keeping the carbon in the soil. You all know that, you know, fighting against climate change, it's all about planting trees and planting forests so that we can get the carbon back to the soil. Did I answer your question? Yeah. So I believe that there is one answer that can answer any question in permaculture. And the answer is, it depends. You always have to adapt. It always depends on the resources that we have available, and it depends on the way that you manage those resources. So it depends.
Hi. I just wanted to say that your humility is really incredible and palpable across the room.
I'm sorry, I don't understand very well.
Okay, I'm saying that your humility is very incredible and palpable across the room, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'm also wondering, you mentioned apprenticeships, and I'm wondering if there's any opportunities to volunteer with you within the next 6 months.
I have a list. You can sign up on that list. Yes, there's a possibility. There's a possibility.
Okay.
I'm gonna take my time, slow down and design.